Love it. Yeah.
How long did you guys know each other?
Oh God, we met in the Blue Planet Dreams album, which would have been around 1994-5. We released it in '96, so we're right in that mid '90s time frame, right?
That sounds right.
Yeah, that's about right.
And I think we met because the a guitarist that was playing
he worked
in
with
his
us.
band, James Abule.
Yes.
He took guitar lessons from me.
Oh, wow.
And then so he maybe suggested the studio or something.
Yeah, he suggested the studio, and then we came in and we met then. And at that point, I really didn't know much about you at all, other than hearing your name kind of buzzing out there, right? But then, and the rest is history.
A lot of studios, for one, don't have the ability to record acoustic instruments so well, because you kind of need we have a real piano, drum sets, and with my studio we can get everybody playing at the same time, which is a neat thing because there's a feel that comes from when everyone's playing at the same time.
Sure.
So we sort of have that capability. Plus my background, I have electronic instruments, but I'm a guitarist and I love playing acoustic guitar. So I think that I do influence their music that way, and I'm happy that they're receptive to it.
Right.
Let's see.
We started Blue Planet Dreams.
And that's you.
Yeah, and then Destinations. Well, actually, I had River Life, which is a solo thing before I met you.
Okay.
And then we did Blue Planet Dreams, and it was me and Dawn. Mainly.
Yeah.
And it was the first time we met you, and then we had other players come in, but Dawn and I wrote that album together. And then we did Destinations, where we brought in Max Zappe, and he tended to bring in more of that Latin flavor, some of the odd times, 7/8 times, and some of the other stuff. And then we had that album come out in about 2000, and then Gap. And then 2018 or 19, I showed up at one of Peter's gigs at Dizzy's, because he does a lot of shows in the jazz clubs and at Dizzy's. And I walked up, and at first I don't think you really recognized who I was, because it had been 17 years. But I said, it's Rob Shinno, Hemisphere, I'm going to do a new album. And so that's how that came out. And that's the American Dreams album that came out last year. It's really nice working with Peter, because one thing is I wanted to make sure that this next generation of Hemisphere was more organic from the standpoint of we don't play to click tracks. We play the albums and the rhythm tracks and stuff live, and maybe we have to take a couple takes and get the right one, but have that floating nature, the organic nature of the bed of the track be real and honest, and not something that has been totally sequenced and vamped and and overanalyzed, but happens in the moment, and then from there. We work together, and Peter does a great job helping us with some of the arrangements and things that are going to go on with the songs, and also the continuity of the album. And I think that's why American Dreams seems to hold together well, because it's got a lot of different styles and a lot of different types of music on it, and it's easy for people to lose the thread of what it is you're trying to do. But working with Peter and with the band, I think we were able to have it feel like an album. If you listen to it from front to back, it was meant to be one cohesive kind of piece, and it does have a flow, and it does have ebbs, and it has bookends on the front and back that kind of tie it all together. In music terms, you have to just keep it real.
I like that.
But which is also organic, and with arrangements that sometimes can be surprising. Right? Because you want that magic to happen. It's music. For instance, we had the song Transmission on the American Dreams album, and I was up here in this very room, and the band's downstairs, and I'm doing my guitar solo stuff and kind of playing with sounds and working on it, trying to figure out what to do. And I tell Peter, I go, okay, we're ready to go. And he tells me, oh no, we're done. Come downstairs.
Oh, nice.
Because it just happened in the magic of the moment. Right?
Yeah, and also the beauty of not thinking, like you weren't thinking, you were just experimenting and being free, and wasn't in that headspace where you thought it was going to be on the record, and
I need to make it perfect. Yeah, because sometimes you won't push the edge, will you? When you know it's
way.
you'll kind of like stay in your lane, right?
My inspiration comes from I draw from hearing other people play recordings. I'm really into surfing. I try that sort of as a state that I like, and I try to integrate that into my playing. And maybe it's always been this way, but with technology, I get a lot of people send me links of musicians and songs, and it's just endless. It's just how incredible the world is of making music and making creations.
Well, it's the first Hemisphere show back in 17 years, I think, right, Peter? Not that I'd have any jitters playing live in front of people after 17 years. But no, I think it's coming together really, really well. And, like I said, this Hemisphere 2.0, if you will, morphing from what was kind of a contemporary fusion instrumental band into being what I describe to people as a very vocal forward band now. We've got a lot of vocalists and a lot of vocals going on. Our live shows, that show will have 4 vocalists, Leonard Patton, Janet Hammer, Donald Bowman, and myself. We also wanted to bring back our history, because Hemisphere was almost kind of like a pop rock thing, and then we moved when I met Don Bowman, since he was a sax player, into this whole kind of instrumental vibe, and smooth jazz was hot right around then. Not that it isn't still today. It's a good genre, but it was super hot then. And so we were kind of on that track, and probably a little too fusion-y for some smooth jazz people, but we were doing that instrumental stuff. But the reason I bring that history in is because on the front end, we were kind of more of a visual band in terms of just the staging of what we would do. We would do odd lighting and scrims and just all kinds of things to put people kind of in a zone when they come to see a Hemisphere performance. And now with the American Dreams album, we're going back to that. Just trying to put people in the space of being more immersive, as well as the music. And I think, Peter, I mentioned that to you, right, around the visual element, to me, is almost like another leg of the stool, right? I want to have great concepts in music with Hemisphere, but I also want people to kind of get immersed in a space where they can kind of lose themselves. I think that's a third part that'll be interesting for the October 2nd show, which is Humphrey's Backstage Live, if you want to know the venue. But it's also the fact that American Dreams, now these songs have kind of stories behind them. So I'll talk about that and kind of explain the dynamics of where the song came from. Peter's a master at that. He does that with a lot of the songs, introduces them, and gives a backstory so people can understand the context of where the writers were coming from and what kind of experience is the music delivering. And then you play it, and to be honest with you, everybody has their own experience with it. So your story may not be theirs, but they understand a little bit more because they have a little more background. We're super excited about it. We've got a great 10-piece band that'll be there for the show. And, since we've been delaying the show for a year, I think we have a lot of pent-up energy here to get out and play.
Oh, man, that's your first gig in 17 years.
Yes.
Yeah, I kind of think what you do, Rob, is you do all the prep that you can do.
Yes.
You don't slack on that, and then you just offer it up and say, I've done everything I can.
Yes.
Let me have a great show, and
and that
tends to work.
Yeah, and that's what I'm going to do. I think we're all doing all the homework. The rehearsals are sounding great. I'm playing every day to work on the show, but at the end of the day, I'm going to get there that night, and I'm just going to have a great time. And I want everybody to just enjoy themselves and kind of lose themselves in the magic of a nice 2.5 hour set. And that if we can do that, then I'll walk away happy.
It's always fascinating to me, the idea of live performances, if people do it over and over again. And I want to hear about your guys' experience, if you have them, with some kind of stage fright or jitters or whatever you want to call it. And what have you done to overcome that in the past?
I tend to do pretty well with that, and Now, times when I have gotten nervous is when somehow I didn't prepare enough for it. So just sort of like what I told Rob. So my theory is you do everything that you can, and so that means a lot of practice, because you'd be surprised at how I recently saw Pat Metheny get interviewed, and he's one of my heroes, and he plays so well, and the interviewer was saying, wow, you just play that phrase so flawlessly and blah blah blah, and he said, it's not as if it just comes and it just does that. I've worked at that thing for a lot of time. So yeah, that's my model too. It's just work at it, and then when the actual performance comes, you sort of surrender yourself and you say, I've done everything I can. There's nothing more that I can do. Let me have a great performance. Yeah. And for me, nervousness comes when I'm unprepared, and so I don't like that feeling. So I always do my homework.
I would say that I have had jitters in the past with live performances, and sometimes it's been because, like Peter said, I wasn't as well prepared as I probably should have been. Mm-hmm. Now that I'm a little bit older and wiser, I know that I can't wing it. So, yeah. So that's all good. And then I think the other thing too is, I tend to be a little more self-aware, if you will, and that's part of the preparation too, because I think about what am I going to say, what's the description of the song, how am I going to introduce things, and not that it's hardwired, but just that you have kind of a plan.
Yeah,
right? I tend to see that with you sometimes.
I do that. I think, where's the story that I can tell about this? So I have different, I improvise once I've found that, but like every song for me has some sort of story or something of interest that I think it's worth sharing. Yes. So I kind of identify that, and then when I am actually saying it, I improvise around it.
It just kind of flows, right? But you have some of the highlights there. You kind of know
something that just along that same line, a band. So it's kind of typical in a way that jazz musicians, they don't, and historically they do not announce songs that much or talk about the song. They just sort of say, this is this, and then they play. And that's cool. That's totally cool. But I came in contact with a bunch of folk, I've recorded a lot of folk musicians and bluegrass musicians, and a huge part of their performance and their delivery is the story. Yeah. And they're just brilliant storytellers. Mm-hmm. And I felt like that is such a neat thing that doesn't have to be just for that music and can be for other types of music too. And so that was a real eye-opener for me, and that was many years ago. It was, in fact, the band Nickel Creek. You remember those guys?
Yeah.
I love Nickel Creek.
Yeah, and they are just phenomenal musicians, but a huge part of the show is these stories that are just funny, clever, insightful, inspirational. So I sort of have to take note of that and try to incorporate that in my thing, and I'm sure I bet you're a good storyteller.
With some of our earlier tunes, them being mainly instrumental, it might have been a little harder to make that connection. I think with a more vocal forward album, with lyrics that typically have a concept, it's you do tend to have a backstory that you can explain a little bit more, that people can relate and hit on. And, I think, Peter, that's really interesting what you said about the Americana scene, right? Because that's taking something out of a different genre and bringing it to jazz. No, really, in the storytelling, because you're right. Jazz players are typically like, oh, we're going to play so on, we're going to play so on. They'll just throw the songs out there, and there aren't too many that tell a story. I mean, Pat Metheny is one, as you referenced, who was one of the few jazz players when I would see him that would tell stories or backstories about his hits or this or that, or struggles with certain Last Train Home as an example. I remember the story that he said about that song, which was very much about hey, everybody thinks this is the perfect melody and everything else, but he goes, it's so far from being perfect that I'm always trying to fine tune it. Every time I play it, and especially when I play it live for an audience, so it's always slightly different.
Yeah.
And trying to pull it, you know what I mean?
And it's a simple song, and he says it kicks his ass because it's so hard to play on.
I think
take a solo on.
Yeah, I think simple songs are more difficult like that. I'm pulling one from the Blue Plant Dreams album called Truth and Beauty. That was a guitar piece that you helped me with because it's nylon, and and at its essence, it's very much like that. It's a simple melody. It's got some hooks in it, though, about the way it's structured with the chorus and so forth. But at the same time, if you overplay it, it's not a very good song. But if you underplay it, it could be a little bit of a boring song. So you have to kind of like be right in that zone, and you're always playing with that, which, how far is too experimental and how far is just taking it down the line, but adding edge little grace notes here and there and things, right, that make it entertaining. Yeah, I think, the American Dreams album was interesting because, I mentioned how I reintroduced myself to Peter, and I said, I want to come over and, just talk about the American Dreams album. I just want to talk about it. I came over and I brought my guitar, and it must have been, early 2019. And I played Peter what I had, which was basically 3 chords of the opening track of America. That's all I had written, literally. And I had the nerve to come over here and show him that, and said, well, what do you think? And, I said, you liked the riff when I played it like 20 years ago, but we never made a song out of it. He goes, well, yeah, that's cool. He goes, where's the rest of it? I said, well, I need to write that. And he looked at me and he said, you have a lot of work to do. And then that was kind of the end of our session, which was great. But I was really inspired at that time, and I still am right now, which is really good. I'm writing a lot. And one thing that I realized that would make a difference in my ability to write and bring a lot of material forward was this idea of mashing things up. So I'm really focused on, taking a concept or something. It may be something that starts out being very Pat Metheny-esque, but I want to morph it, and I want to add a prog rock section to it and make it feel like Genesis at some point in time. Or I want to take something that feels kind of EDM-y like Pet Shop Boys, but make it sound retro like Casey and the Sunshine Band at the same time. Or take a ballad and just morph it with different kinds of things. And I find when I'm trying to do that, then I suddenly get really inspired, because there's just so many different angles that you can take, and you're trying to find the 2 directions that are like contrary to each other, slightly angular, if you will.
I love this because I would have never thought of this, but he had, I think it was, what was it, Transmission, where he had that song rolling along, and then he brought out this little box that's a little cheap synthesizer and recorded his voice saying transformation or something like that, like a robot. And I thought that was brilliant. And that was something that I would have never thought of mixing into this mix. And I think it really works. So yeah, that's a cool thing to have kind of no rules as far sort of a mission statement. No rules. Everything is open to try and create great art, right? At the end of the day, I think that you bring up a good point there, which is like, we have all this technology, and Peter has a beautiful studio here. If anybody wants to work here, I'm free ad. Absolutely great place to work and create, which is a lot of modern machinery, as Rush would say, right? All this modern machinery making music, but then. Peter also keeps it very organic, because we all play together and we play live, and there's no sequencers, and it's all live musicians 100% of the time, which is great because it allows us to float a little bit. And then I think the third angle that I bring to the table sometimes is I can go very retro. So to me, technology doesn't mean expensive. Technology to me means using some things and various electronic things, but just doing weird and odd, unusual things with them. I did it there on Transmission, but there were some other little pieces here and there.
I have an old memory moog from 1986
I
that
love
I had
that.
had re-retrofitted, and you can buy that synth in a computer version, but to me it's not the same as the actual keyboard with all the knobs that I can twiddle and twist and figure out exactly how the sound needs to happen organically in this weird old analog kind of way, right? So I think that idea of almost like low tech, high tech, and organicness are probably the three dimensions that I always want to try and keep going forward, because it just feels like you can create so much magic that can happen in that envelope.
So I don't want to forget to ask about the fact, Hemisphere is an LGBTQ fronted band, and how have you been received in the music industry for that? Has it made it easier to get people's attention? Has it been harder? How has that worked?
That's really interesting. When I did my solo album in 1994, and then we did Blue Planet Dreams immediately after in '96 with Peter, and I thought the album was good, and it had a lot of the right elements for that smooth jazz kind of radio friendly contemporary kind of stuff in it, as well as the Destinations album in 2000. But I think in certain genres of music, and it's not true everywhere, but it's different genres are different. Like in rock music, okay, it's fine to be flamboyant and crazy because you could be Elton John, David Bowie-esque, Morrissey-esque, all that stuff. The ground was broken there in a lot of places. I think the further you move out from that rock and roll dynamic, where it's very much an image-related thing, the music's important, but also the branding, the image, the look, the style is very critical. As you moved out of that, at least in the 80s and 90s, it's a lot more difficult. I thought, in the jazz space,
Difficult in being
difficult,
understood, sort of. Or,
understood and accepted.
Yeah.
And I think that there were a lot of places in the country, because the difference was in 1994, I was an out gay artist. I was advertised in the gay press. My photos were out there. My albums were bonded, with, gay press image and all this other stuff. And back then, there was a resistance in certain areas of the country, as well as just certain genres of music, where it was kind of a little bit of a taboo. They weren't really going to go there. And you have to put that in context, because say around the year 2000, there was no same-sex marriage at all in the entire country. I think Vermont, one little state. But outside of that, you didn't really have the same rights and so on. And then just in the polls, dynamically, probably only 40% or some low number of Americans really supported that idea, right? So, I think it was a bit of a more uphill battle with national press for me. Not so much in California or San Diego, I'm not saying that, but I think when you started to extend yourself and go further, it became more and more difficult depending on how visible you wanted to be and so on. Then I think fast forward to 2020, American Dreams album, I think it's a total non-issue, which I think is great.
Yeah.
I think we're very accepted. It doesn't really matter. Don Bowman and I are both gay men who happen to be in this band of 5 people. And then on the album, there's 10 people on the album, So I view it more of like, we're a band that happens to have some LGBTQ plus members. It's nice to tell our community about what we're doing, because I think it's important, for many reasons. But I think the acceptance issue is less of an issue. What I see is and it's just observational, because I don't feel like I'm directly affected. But I think Asians in music and in media and culture have been somewhat underrepresented. So that's been a little more difficult. You don't see many Asians kind of fronting a band where Don's the lead singer and I'm the talking person, out, telling the stories and doing that kind of stuff. You don't see too much of that, I think. And so it's, if anything, I'd like to, be one of those people that tries to, push or break that glass ceiling a little bit, because we're starting to see it in movies and in mainstream Hollywood now, which is great. And I think music doesn't intentionally try and be that way, but I think it's just the way society perceives the Asian American culture, right? It doesn't tend to be as out front, and it doesn't tend to be media driven, and so on. But I'm excited about it. I'm excited about getting out and doing the shows. And honestly, these days I don't even think about the LGBTQ plus dynamic of me interrelating with people in an audience or anything like that. I'm just Rob.
Yeah.
When you create music yourself, do you feel that you have a responsibility with your music, or are you following completely wherever the music is leading you, that path? I mean, do you have like a goal in your mind other than just the sound when you create music?
Well, I do have sort of something that I want to go towards, which is I really want it to be as good as I can make it.
Oh,
so,
sure. Yeah.
like Rob talked about it earlier, about recording, and then there's some little thing that you think, oh, it's not quite right, and so we all go through that, and I'm really lucky because I have a studio. I can make it right
Nice. Nice.
on my own. So
Yes.
I do that. I do a lot of stuff where I listen. Like today, yesterday, we're putting out a new recording, and it's getting really close to being done, of Pat Metheny's music, but we're doing it in our own way with different singers, and
Sure.
these are songs that were instrumental and they now have words. And so yesterday I took the recording, the mixes are done, I went to the car. That's kind of a standard thing, is to go to the car and listen to the mixes in a different environment, sort of a cheaper environment,
Sure.
to see if it plays out. And I made notes, and one of the notes was, I just hate that lick that I played. So this morning before you came, and this has been, I've worked at it for a long time, but this thing still bothered me, so I just went and fixed it.
Nice.
I just follow the music, but I also want to do it so that I'm really happy with it for the rest of my life.
I will say American Dreams, what I like is there are very few
Yeah.
points in that at all that bother me. There's nothing that sticks out that bothers me.
Yeah.
And I think that points to Peter's organic style of keeping this real. I mean, it's almost an album that's got production but has a live feel to it. And with that, certain imperfections are okay.
Yeah, it's
know?
just as long as you're okay with it,
Yeah.
certain. But if there's something that bugs you, it's gonna forever bug you.
Yes, I agree. I'll agree with that. That's like the photobomb that didn't quite work, right? We heavily pushed this idea of having this message of unity, diversity, and equality with the new Hemisphere 2.0, whatever you want to call it, version. And I'm kind of sticking with that because I kind of feel like that's something that will never be fixed or right in my lifetime. But even through a butterfly effect, if I can have a little bit of an effect just to change a few little things here and there, someone's perception, or someone got inspired, across the planet somewhere, just hearing something, that would be a nice thing. We started this American Dreams album, and about, halfway through the album, I started telling them about my grandiose plans. This was going to be a 3-album arc.
Yeah.
And so, but the nice thing is it really feels good, like we're going to do that. So we have the second album called Unity that Peter's going to help us work on. We're going to start recording next spring. And so we have American Dreams, and we have Unity in the middle, which we've talked about making a little more thematic, symphonic, if you will, with a live string section, and making that different from American Dreams in that context. And then we'll close out the trilogy with this third album called Power of the People, and it's going to be very, very horn-driven, very horn-centric.
Neat.
Kind of like a powerful, almost written for live statement. And I kind of feel that arc, that's as far as I can see now. So
that's pretty good.
So if we can pull that trilogy arc off of the 3 albums, I'll be happy. And if I get hit by a truck eating a burrito, I'll be fine.
Like a lot of what we record now is first or second takes. It isn't, there'll be some fixes to do, but the basic spirit of it, if everyone's sort of tuned in, you can capture it soon and repair later. Because you can really ruin a song, ruin a feel of a song by just continually doing it, and
Over analysis, right?
yeah. So and I think with your guys' thing, we did. We weren't belaboring things.
Oh,
We weren't.
no.
We as soon as we get it, we would kind of move on.
It was one or two takes.
Yeah.
And that was the bed of the song. Again, tweaking some things here and there later. But the reality of it is, I think, capturing that inspiration of the moment. I think it goes back to what Peter said about, prepping. If the band is prepped and you're prepped and you have the construct of the song, you basically know what, how you want it to flow and what the message is, and in the Hemisphere case, what the lyrical content is and all of that, then you're in pretty good shape. And then you don't want to overanalyze it. You need to get people in there to take that picture, if you will, that's the foundation of the house, And once you have that, then you can go and add the twiddly bits and other things that go on it to finish the finesse of it. I think a lot of things can be ruined by over-analysis in art. And for me, in writing, and Peter and I've mentioned to a couple times, as well as to some other reviewers, that I find inspiration to be the key. So if I have an idea or something, I've got to write it down or sing it into my phone or type it out on my phone, the lyrics. And typically that happens in 30 seconds to 3 minutes for an entire new piece that just came to me from the universe, and it's in my head. And I need to capture that moment, because just like a butterfly, it'll flit off and it'll be gone forever if I don't capture that moment. Other times I can sit there and play and noodle on my guitar for 8 hours and not really write anything particularly special, and so I try and stay away from the forced elements of thinking it's 10 o'clock, I need to write. From 10 to 11 I write. No. I write whenever the mood strikes me, and thus, the 11 tracks in American Dreams were all written that way. All of them were inspired in a moment where the basic the foundation of the piece, even if it was just like a verse or something, was done in less than 3 minutes. Peter and I will sit and I'll play him something, and he'll help with chord arrangement and say, oh no, that should be something there. You're missing a chord. And this type of thing that happens. But to me, that's refinement.
Sometimes there's just a melody that comes, and also something that's, I think, kind of interesting is I tend to, and I'm not the only one, do well with writing with a prescription that's sort of handed to me,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
One thing that happened years ago, there was a company in San Diego, it was called Network Music, and what they did is they were a company that recorded songs, original songs, and they always had, these songs would go on CDs, and they would eventually end up at movie studios, and for the producers say, we need a piece of music that fits into this slot, let's try this. And then they call it needle drop music, or they did call it needle drop music. And these songs would then get placed, and they could pay far less money, they being the producers could pay far less money for this music than if they had it custom written.
Sure.
And so us as composers, we would get these prescriptions. Okay, we were going to do an Ottmar Liebert flamenco nuevo jazz record of needle drop music. Peter write 3 songs, and then there's a prescription, there's boundaries, because sometimes when you come to compose and the whole world is possible, it's daunting.
Yeah.
But so to have that, then the compositions need to fit within that style, and so it narrows it down, and it's an interesting way to do it. And I've kind of carried that same idea. We have a band that we meet up. It's sort of a collective, and we call it the Tribute Rebels. And the idea is we're always doing these tributes to other people's music. Well, let's do a tribute to our own music. But I come up with sort of a theme that each of the composers in the band writes a song with that theme. So like a recent theme was things I like that I used to hate. So everyone wrote songs that had that. I had a song called Onions that I used to hate as kids. Onions, I used to hate them, and then I like them now. And then my brother had a song he wrote about dogs, which he didn't like in the beginning, and now he does. So anyway, sometimes melodies happen because of this prescription. And then other times, and the magic times are when they're handed to you, like Rob said, and I've had that too before, where I've woken up and in a dream had a melody and then followed it, and melodies are really the most they have the most value in a song, and that's one thing that I do love about Pat Metheny. He has just got such strong melodies, and that's a real gift, because you can give a beginner musician, okay, you have to create a melody with these 12 notes in the key of C, nothing else, and you can give an experienced composer those two the same prescription, and it's hard to create a great melody.
I think for me, there's three dimensions to me to where I kind of start with. One can be rhythm. There's a certain rhythm that I'm thinking of in my head, or that I'm messing with in a drum machine, or whatever it might be, or two pencils. And I'm just figuring out there's a rhythm that's a starting point. And that's why Mike McQuilkin, my drummer, and why we work very well together, because sometimes he'll just give me a rhythm, play Afro-Cuban something, and I'll be like, oh, okay, well, what if I played these other chords? And to me, again, being, mashing things up, and a lot of times due to inexperience, right? Because Peter's much more experienced than I am in all of that. But sometimes I'm just putting things together because I don't know any better, and so, which is okay.
It's great.
But it's a bit of magic that happens with that. And sometimes it's chordal, like I'll just be messing around on the keyboard and I'll say oh, that's interesting. What a different chord change. And you can hear those kinds of songs with certain artists and certain things, like David Bowie's Life on Mars is very much like that. You can tell it was written on piano, because when it comes to the chorus section, it's a very odd thing that he does modally, that most people wouldn't think of, right? But it just came to him and he just played it, and that became the song. So it was a chord-driven thing. And then sometimes it's a melody, right? Just like you said. So I think melody's super important, and like Peter said, you can't have a good song without having a decent melody. With the American Dreams album, I think we're real pleased with the way it turned out. I think it hangs together well as an album, and it has a lot of variety on it, which I think can be a plus or a minus. But to me, the nice thing about having that variety is I become less bored with as an artist, both to perform those songs as well as to have it be in my history catalog, right? And then secondarily, I think Peter and I had one or two pre-production sessions for the next album, Unity, and there's two things I'm excited about with that. One is this idea to make it more of a symphonic album. So that's going to take us in a different space and a different direction, and yet still build on American Dreams and what we did. We've leaned now towards being a pretty thematic act and band, which means that shows are going to morph over time. People aren't going to see the same thing. So the American Dreams show at Humphrey's Backstage live, October 2nd, again to advertise the date, but it is going to be unique in that we won't ever do that show again. We won't have a lot of live shows because we got some writing to do. We probably want to put 10 tracks on the Unity album, but we've got about 13 written, but I want to have about 15 or 16 that we can review with Peter and kind of put together the construct of what's a really great album. And then from there, we'll be in Austin at South by Southwest in 2022 in March, and then we'll come back to San Diego for another live show where we'll start to showcase a little bit of the new album live. Idea. And it's the first time, it's one of the first times, Peter, I think, where I've been able to take out new material and perform it live before it gets recorded. I don't think I've ever done that before.
That's kind of neat because then you can sort of measure how it's going over and what's working, what's not working.
Exactly. You get to test drive a little bit more than we've done in the past, which is more of, record the album, record the songs, and then figure out how we're going to get them into a live format, right?
Mm-hmm.
Test drive them out. In fact, at Humphrey's, we're going to do the one cover we're going to put on the album, which is David Bowie's Rebel Rebel. And I talked to Peter about this, and so we have this angular idea of we're going to do that song because it's kind of personal to me. I grew up with it, when I was 13, 14 years old, and it made a big impression on me, both the song and also Bowie as an artist at the time. And but we're going to take it and we're going to mash it up in that Hemisphere way. So we're doing a really kind of Steely Dan backbeat rhythm section and horn section piece to it. And then we're going to combine it with a really kind of Roxy Music, Brian Ferry-esque vocal section. So it's going to be different, another mashup, but it'll be interesting, number one, to test drive it out live before we're going to get in the studio to record it. And then secondarily, for me personally, because, I'm not really great at doing cover material. So it'll be the first time that I'll go out and actually do someone else's songs and material in probably 45 years. Which is, I think, a pretty long time, right, Peter?
Yeah.
To not do any covers.
That's a lifetime.
That's a lifetime of non-covers. But I'm going to do it.
Good for you. Something that we're having a wonderful time doing is these live stream concerts, and we're going to do the music of Chick Corea in about 2 weeks. That's coming up, and those will continue. They usually happen once every 3 weeks. We do a show, and there are some live gigs, not that many, and I'm kind of okay with that because I'm still concerned about the COVID and that kind of thing. But there are some gigs, and the studio stays pretty busy. There's people, not a lot of people doing full records, but there's a lot of people doing 2 or 3 songs and a lot of video. It's an important part of it now. Is an area that a lot of people are aiming towards is just get a couple songs with video up on YouTube. That's sort of the medium.
Mm-hmm. And Peter, your live streams are on your YouTube channel.
Yeah, all the past ones are, and there are some interesting themes. We did music of Paul Simon last week. We've done Joni Mitchell, the Beatles, Stevie Wonder, Alison Krauss, the tribute rebels, as I mentioned before.
Nice.
But it's a good life. I'm having great times and staying busy.
Good.